Hi, so I'm just coming back from Washington, D.C., where I spent a few days and I learned a lot of interesting tidbits from the diplomats, entrepreneurs, and everyone in between that I met over there. So it's very, very interesting, and I wanted to share it with you. So my name is Peggy van der Plassche. Thank you for joining my podcast. So first, why was I in Washington? One of my good friend, Nikhil Palli, who actually lives in India, is a lawyer in India, international lawyer, was awarded the title of Kentucky Colonel. So if you don't know the title of Kentucky Colonel, which was my case, it's actually a recognition of goodwill and service. So he does a lot of work with his law firm in terms of social equity and supporting social causes. So that is why he was awarded this title. So just to give you a bit of context, before him, Abraham Lincoln, Winston Churchill, Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton received this title. So that is super, super impressive. So I had not been in Washington, D.C. for many years. I used to go very, very often, but it has been quite some time since I've been. And it was cool to reconnect with the city after so much time. But also I met tons of super, super interesting people in these 3 days I was there. And I also had the opportunity to take the pulse of Washington because, as you know, a lot of things are happening right now in the US with the new Trump administration, and I was very curious to see for myself and to hear for myself what was happening there. I'm a founding board member of Invest in Canada. So Invest in Canada is a Canadian organization that is promoting and attracting foreign direct investment. So I am not a stranger to interacting with diplomats. I've done that for many years. And also because I'm a French immigrant, I've also been lucky to be invited quite sometimes to parties at the French Ambassador House in Canada. So I'm quite familiar with that world. But this time it really felt different. I would say I really felt noticeable hesitance from people to share their perspectives more than in similar past encounters. So I was still able to uncover some tidbits that I think will interest you. And let's get moving. So Washington for me, has always been a sleepy town. It makes me think about Ottawa in Canada. The energy is quite subdued. And I would say going back again, this time it didn't change my mind on Washington. I would say it actually reinforced this perception. An example is dinner spots that open at 4 p.m. So you can have your dinner at 4 p.m. And it really, really speaks to that quiet vibes and chatting with locals that was confirmed. Some people even use the word boring when referring to Washington. I will not judge. Um, on the super bright side, if you've never been to Washington, the museum are stunning, as are the botanical gardens actually, and they are free. That is interesting in these times where every spending is being cut. So I don't know for how long they're free. Maybe buy your flight tickets now. But the museum are really, really stunning. And during the visit, because of Nikhil's celebration, we got a private tour of the Organization of American States, or the OAS, and it's a forum I had never encountered before, but it's really a gem. And they're really working with, I think there are 34 member states, including Canada. France is actually a permanent observer there. And they work on issues like social inclusion, human rights, democracy. So it's a very, very important organization, which I have to admit I was not aware of before. And I hope they're going to be able to escape the budget cuts. It is an organization that is funded by all the member states, and the US is one of the member states. So hopefully, they will continue to participate in this organization. They have actually a beautiful, beautiful building that was funded by Andrew Carnegie back in the day. So it's really an institution. And then at night, we had the celebration of Nikhil's commission at the Army and Navy Club, which was also something I was not aware of. Like it's obviously a private club for military, which I'm not. And it was very interesting because we had a very mixed group of people, as I say, entrepreneurs, diplomats, former ambassador, current ambassadors. Um, it was very, very interesting to exchange notes, and it was really very low key, like engaging conversations, people from academia as well. So great exchange of ideas, really the type of things I love. So what is the first finding I got from my 3 days in the cities? Not just that dinner, but really the 3 days in the city. The first thing I would call is the one we don't name. And I thought it was very interesting. I was really struck by how little direct discussions there was about the Trump administration in general and Donald Trump in particular. People really seem to tread very carefully and not knowing exactly what the other person in front of them is thinking. They're really, really keeping their cards close to their chest. So I heard like a couple of people naming Trump, and it was very rare. And, I was eavesdropping at some restaurants when I was alone, and it was funny to hear people barely referring to him by name, but they're talking about him. So, um, you hear a reference such as a dictator lacking empathy. People even contrast him to Reagan, who at least had a shred of empathy. I heard several times comparison to Putin, which I thought was interesting, and picked up also some chatter around the fact that the predictions are that China will overtake the US. So again, this was just eavesdropping because people were not directly talking about the Trump administration and Donald Trump, which I thought was very, very interesting. When it comes to the policies and the federal cuts, as you can imagine, in a city like Washington, D.C., the aggressive federal budget cuts, it was a sensitive topic. But it was interesting when I was asking the question, people were really publicly downplaying their concerns, but their tone and body language was absolutely not aligned with what they were saying. You could really feel unease at discussing the topic, but also at the uncertainty linked with all these federal cuts and new policies. I would say the decision really to gut USAID, that was really seen as incomprehensible to most. And when it comes to the tariff and also the budget cuts, I had several people telling me that it was stupid. So I thought it was very interesting. I asked the question of why we have not seen more civil servants, like protest and resist. And what I was told is that a lot of them are waiting for the courts to weigh in and for the unions to step in. So that's why they're really in that wait and see mode, which might appear as passive, but it's actually strategic, I would say. So that was interesting. So I'm sure many of you again we're actually February 14th. Happy Valentine's Day. Today in the newspapers, there was a lot of reference from President Trump to Canada. Again, who should become the 51st state of the US, which will obviously simplify the tariff situation. If you're American, you don't need tariff. So I I was very curious to hear what people had to say about this generous offer of the US towards Canada to become the 51st state. And that was a very interesting takeaway for me because it didn't seem shocking to most of the people I spoke with that Canada could become a 51st state. It didn't feel even insulting, which personally I think it is, but and actually some even considered it as an opportunity for Canadians. And that's something that had been confirmed by one of my girlfriend who was actually a couple of weeks ago in the US for a finance conference where Americans were actually telling her that, well, she should be happy. You know, we should be lucky as Canadian about that very generous offer from the US. So I thought it was very, very interesting that no one was pointing out the fact that it was, well, pretty insulting to say that. I don't know. Being French, I'm not sure if we were to say, well, Belgium should become French and it is what it is. I don't know. It doesn't feel very respectful to me, but visibly it didn't seem to be shocking. When it comes to to Canada's political landscape, that was interesting as well. So first, there is very little antagonism towards Canada, even regarding the tariff retaliation. So that I thought was very interesting. Prime Minister Trudeau actually was very well received. His pushback on tariff and pushback on Trump was quite well perceived in the US with the people I spoke with, let's be honest. Chrystia Freeland was actually praised as well for her competence during Trump's first presidency, and she was actually seen as a very solid successor to the prime minister, which I thought was interesting. When it comes to Mark Carney, he was less known, you know, like really, really less known. He was also perceived positively. And when it comes to Pierre Poilievre, actually, no one even knew his name. So it was not a positive or negative perception. He was entirely off the radar. His name was literally unknown, which I thought was quite interesting. So that's again, I could see people were interested by the Canadian election, but you know, not so much that they would know all our contenders actually. Um, so the perception of Canada's state of affairs was absolutely not rosy. There were concerns about rising crime rates. I had to correct a couple of times the fact that the crime rates in Toronto was way lower than in Chicago, which surprised many people. The perception of a very, very struggling healthcare, again, interesting coming from the US, but also the idea that we have a catastrophic immigration situation. So a very pessimistic outlook towards Canada and its states of affairs, which maybe might explain why the idea of Canada as the 51st state was not met with outrage, because I think maybe the US is looking at Canada as a country that is on a downward spiral. So it was interesting. So immigration was the topic that everyone talked about when referring to Canada. And I would say it was, you could see two dominant narratives that are not mutually exclusive. I would say it's two sides of the same coin from my perspective, but that was very interesting. So the first one is really this idea of mismanagement of immigration, that Canada has mismanaged its immigration, that the vetting process is seen as too lenient, and that a lot of people with fake documentations are slipping through the net. The second is that the infrastructure has not kept up with the influx of immigrants and that it has created strain on healthcare, education, housing. And the third point in this mismanagement is linked with the fact that immigrants often struggle due to the lack of recognition of their diplomas and experience, which leads to unemployment. So again, I would say the first narrative is really, really linked to this mismanagement of immigration by the government. and I would mention the Trudeau's administration, considering they're the ones who's been in power for 10 years. It was not named precisely, but the idea is really the immigration has been greatly mismanaged. The second narrative, and again, I think it's exactly the same narrative, just from a different point of view, is the disenchantment among immigrants in Canada. So, for example, the the perspective is middle class Indians are less interested in moving to Canada because they realize that the promised opportunities that doesn't align with reality. And maybe some of you know Canada actually advertise a lot in many countries in the world. The opportunity to come to Canada. It happened to me. I moved to Canada 21 years ago. And I remember 22 years ago, I went to conference or maybe more an exhibit from Canada to attract French immigrants. And we were shown rent at the time, 22 years ago, very different now, that probably had not been updated in 10 years because when we arrived in Montreal, very different cost. We were told our diploma were recognized, which was not the case, that our experience was recognized, which was not the case. So I can vouch for that it has been the same experience I lived, which was being advertised something that was very disconnected with reality. So it is something that is very front and center for people who have immigrants in their families, in their relatives, or are just aware of how things work. So this disenchantment among immigrants was again a strong narrative, and this idea that many immigrants were baited by programs that advertise, a utopian vision of Canada only to face challenges like, again, high living costs, career stagnation, very stretched healthcare system. That is a message I heard over and over again. And I thought that was very interesting. So again, in terms of final thoughts, I think that trip was fascinating because it really gave me a perspective on Washington's current climate, but also how the world perceives Canada. Again, these observations are anecdotal, but they still reflect a very diverse array of perspectives, like from diplomats to entrepreneurs to lawyers to Uber drivers and people coming from countries like obviously the US, but also India, UK, Colombia, Pakistan. So it was really a very good sample, even if it was not statistically significant. I would not call it a research program. So again, for me, so Washington has not really changed my perception of its sleepy energy, but it's really reminding me of the importance of really staying connected, understanding what other people are thinking. Like very often we think that the way we see our country is the only thing that matter, but actually we're doing business with foreigners. So how can we stay connected? How can we stay curious? How can we stay open to dialogue? And for me, it was a fabulous opportunity. Obviously, I was delighted to go to Washington to celebrate my friends' like massive achievement. But it was also fabulous to hear really the candid views on really pressing issues. So for me, it was a great trip of learning and reflection. And that's really something I would engage you to do, when you travel, have a chat, not just with a Uber driver, but at least it gives you a bit of an idea. But, eavesdrops, have a chat, different perspective, and you will have a better understanding of what's going on in this country, but also how they perceive your own country. So thank you so much for listening. If you're interested, you can learn more about what I do, my services at peggyvandeplage.com. And I really enjoyed that episode of a podcast. Please don't hesitate to comment. I'm really curious to hear maybe what you have seen, what you have heard, and what is your perspective on all of that. Thank you so much. Have a good day.